The machine beside me was the only thing keeping time. Green numbers, quiet beeps, a rhythm I'd stopped listening to somewhere around hour 30. My ribs were wrapped so tight I could only take shallow breaths, and every one of them felt like dragging a rake across broken glass. That's the state I was in when the door opened at 11:47 p.m. I know the time because I'd been staring at the clock on the wall for the last 20 minutes, the way you do when sleep won't come and pain won't let you forget where you are. The door didn't creak. It just opened, slow and careful, like someone testing whether the hinges would betray them. A uniform stepped in first, dark blue, silver badge catching the hallway light before the door swung shut behind him. He wasn't rushing. That's what got me. Cops who bring good news rush. Cops who bring bad news walk like they're trying not to wake something up. He crossed the room without a word, boots quiet on the tile, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that a man his size shouldn't be able to move that soft. He stopped at the rail of my bed, close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the door, like he expected it to open again any second. Then he leaned down. Close enough I could smell the coffee on his breath, the rain still clinging to his jacket. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. 4 words. That's all it took to turn every wire in my body electric. My heart rate must have spiked because the monitor beside me gave a little irritated chirp, and he flinched at it like it had gone off like a siren. I opened my mouth, some half-formed question sitting on my tongue, and he shook his head once, sharp, a warning. His hand hovered near my shoulder like he wanted to press me back into the pillow. Keep me still by force if he had to. "Your daughter," he said, voice barely above breath. "She's the reason I'm here." 2 words. My daughter. And just like that, the pain in my ribs didn't matter anymore. The fog from whatever they pumped into my IV burned off in an instant. I was fully awake, fully present, staring at a stranger in uniform who knew her name before I'd said it, who knew enough about my life to walk into a hospital room after visiting hours and tell me to stay quiet. I want to tell you what happened next. I want to tell you what he said after that, what I saw in his eyes, what I did with my broken body in that moment. But if I start there, none of it will make sense. You won't understand why a cop would risk his badge to whisper in the dark to a man who could barely lift his own head off the pillow. You won't understand why my daughter's name coming out of his mouth felt less like relief and more like a threat. So let me take you back. Not to the hospital. Further than that. Back to the night everything started falling apart. Weeks before I ever ended up in this bed. Weeks before badges and whispers and locked doors. Because by the time I'm done, you'll understand exactly why 11:47 p.m. became the moment that split my life into before and after. And I promise you, the truth is worse than anything you're imagining right now. 3 weeks before the crash, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on 5th Street, the kind of place where the dryers hummed through the floorboards until midnight. My wife Danielle had moved out 4 months earlier, and the divorce papers sat on my kitchen counter, half-signed, because I couldn't make myself finish reading page 6. Custody arrangement. Emma's name typed next to Danielle's, and mine listed under supervised visitation only, pending review. 2 words that meant a judge in a gray courtroom had looked at my file. My late-night texts, the missed pickups, the one time I showed up to get Emma from soccer practice smelling like whiskey because I'd had 2 beers at lunch after a bad meeting and decided I couldn't be trusted alone with my own daughter. I wasn't a drunk, I want to say that clearly, but I was something almost as dangerous. I was checked out. I was a man who answered fine to everything, who stopped showing up to Emma's recitals because Danielle and I couldn't be in the same room without one of us leaving in tears, who let 3, 4, 5 days pass without calling because I told myself she was better off without the tension. Emma was 14. She had my mother's eyes and Danielle's stubborn jaw, and the last real conversation we had was in March, in a parking lot outside her middle school, both of us sitting in my truck with the engine running. "You keep saying you're going to change something," she said, staring straight ahead. "But you never do." I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't, not really. After March, the calls got shorter. Then they stopped being calls at all. Just texts, 1-word replies, then no replies. By August, I'd sent maybe a dozen messages into a silence. So complete, I started to wonder if her number had changed. Danielle wouldn't tell me, said I needed to earn that information back, whatever that meant. The marriage had been dying long before any of that. Danielle and I stopped being partners somewhere around year 11, when the business I'd sunk our savings into folded, and I started working nights just to avoid sitting across from her at dinner, both of us pretending the silence wasn't screaming. She said I disappeared long before I ever left the house. She wasn't wrong. The night of the accident, I'd had exactly one drink. One, a double bourbon at a bar called The Anchor. 3 hours after Danielle's lawyer emailed me a settlement offer that would have let me see Emma 4 hours a month, supervised, in a community center with fluorescent lights and a stranger taking notes. I read that email standing in a gas station parking lot, and something in my chest just folded. I shouldn't have been driving, not because of the bourbon. My blood alcohol came back well under the limit. That detail matters more than you know. But because I was driving through tears, I couldn't stop, down Route 9 in the rain, going too fast around the curve by the reservoir, when headlights came at me from the wrong lane. I remember the sound, before I remember the impact. A horn, long and useless. Then glass. Then nothing but red light and a taste like pennies in my mouth. I didn't know yet what that crash would set in motion. I didn't know a cop would one day lean over my hospital bed and say Emma's name like it was a warning. I just knew, lying in that wreckage, that the last thing I'd thought about before impact was Emma's name. That's where the memory always snaps back to the present. Back to this room, this bed, the machines counting my heartbeat like they don't trust me to do it myself. But before the whisper, before the cop, there were 3 days that I keep turning over in my mind, looking for the crack where it all started to go wrong. The first day, a nurse named Priya came in to check my vitals and wouldn't look at me. Not in a rude way, in a careful way, like she was avoiding something breakable on the floor. When I asked if my daughter had called, she paused just a half-second too long before saying, "Not that I've seen," and left before I could ask anything else. I told myself I was reading into it. Painkillers make you paranoid. That's what everyone says. The second day, I tried Rachel 11 times. My ex-wife has never once let a call from me ring out, not even during the divorce, not even when she hated me enough to spit when she said my name. Straight to voicemail, every time. Her voice, bright and rehearsed, telling me to leave a message. I left 4. I don't remember what I said in any of them. I remember hanging up and staring at the ceiling tile with the water stain shaped like Florida, feeling something cold drop through my chest. That afternoon, a man stood in the hallway outside my door for almost 20 minutes. I noticed him because he wasn't wearing scrubs, wasn't wearing a visitor badge, wasn't doing anything except standing there with his hands in his coat pockets, watching the door like he was waiting for someone to leave. When I asked an aide who he was, she glanced out, frowned, and said she didn't recognize him. By the time I asked again, he was gone. Then there was the chart. Small thing, should mean nothing. My physical therapist came in for the afternoon session and couldn't find my updated file. She flipped through the folder twice, checked the computer, called down to records. "It's here somewhere," she said, in that too calm voice people use when something is very much not fine. It turned up an hour later, she told me, just misplaced. I've worked enough job sites to know when someone's covering for a mistake they don't want traced back to them. That night I woke up around 2, throat dry, and heard voices in the hallway. Low. Urgent. One of them was Priya. I caught fragments through the door. "Can't keep this from him if..." And then a sharper voice cutting her off, not her call to make. Footsteps. Silence. I lay there with my heart slamming against the wires taped to my chest, staring at that ceiling stain, thinking about Emma's laugh, the one she used to have before everything between us went quiet. By the 3rd day, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Hospitals are strange places. People whisper, charts go missing, ex-wives get busy. I told myself that story because the other one, the one forming at the edges of my mind, was too big to hold. I didn't know yet that somewhere across town, something was already happening to my daughter, something nobody in that hospital wanted to be the one to tell me. I didn't know that the man in the hallway wasn't lost. I didn't know that Priya's silence wasn't caution. It was mercy, buying time before someone else had to walk through that door and say the thing out loud. I just knew that something was wrong. I could feel it in my ribs before I could name it. And 2 nights later, at 11:47 p.m., a cop would finally tell me why. The door didn't creak. That's the first thing I noticed, because I'd memorized every sound that room made over 11 days, the hiss of the oxygen line, the tick of the blood pressure cuff resetting itself every 20 minutes, the particular groan of the door hinge when a nurse came to check my vitals. This was different. This was quiet on purpose. He came in like a man who'd practiced not being seen. The badge caught the hallway light for half a second before he clicked the door shut behind him, and that's when he said it. "Don't make a sound." My heart was already slamming into the metal frame of the bed rail. I opened my mouth anyway, some reflex, some leftover instinct to demand answers, and he raised a hand, palm flat, like he was pressing the words back down my throat. "I'm not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was low, almost apologetic, but steady, in a way that made my stomach drop. "I'm off duty. This isn't a visit. If anyone asks, I was never in this building tonight." I stared at him. Late 30s maybe, tired eyes, a 5 o'clock shadow that looked 3 days old, not the clean-shaven look of a man reporting for a shift. His uniform was slightly wrong too, untucked at the back, like he'd thrown it on in a hurry instead of pressed it that morning. "Emma," he said, and the name hit me like the first jolt of the crash all over again. "Your daughter is not safe right now, and I need you to trust me for the next few minutes, because I don't have time to explain everything, and every second we spend on you asking questions is a second we don't have." I remember gripping the blanket, my knuckles white against the pale blue fabric, my mind trying to catch up to a sentence that didn't make sense yet. "Her mother's boyfriend," he said. "Man named Russo. Dale Russo. You know him?" I shook my head. I didn't know the man's name. I barely knew he existed. A shape mentioned once by a nurse who caught herself too late. "He's got a warrant out of 2 counties, the cop said. "Assault, 1 count of it against a minor, unrelated case, different kid, different state. He's not someone your ex-wife should have anywhere near your daughter. And I don't think she fully knows what she's dealing with." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in with the weight of what he wasn't saying yet. "Why are you telling me?" I managed. "Why not her? Why not the school, CPS, somebody who can actually—" "Because I don't know who else to trust in this building," he cut in, glancing at the door like he expected it to open any second. "Someone here has been talking, feeding information out, about Emma's location, about visits, about you. I don't know who yet. Could be a nurse, could be someone in records. But every time we've gotten close to Russo, he's a step ahead, like he's got a line into this hospital, and that scares me more than anything else in this case." The missing chart. The whispered conversation cut short in the hallway, the man loitering by the elevator who wasn't lost after all. "So you're going to lie there," the cop said. Quieter now, almost gentle. "And you're going to trust me, and you're not going to make a sound. Because if the wrong person hears what I just told you, it won't just be Emma who's in danger. It'll be both of you." I didn't answer him with words. I answered by grabbing the IV line taped to the back of my hand and ripping it free, the sting sharp and clean, blood beating up fast. The cop's eyes went wide, like he hadn't expected me to move that quick, broken ribs and all. "That's not exactly what I meant by staying quiet," he whispered. "You said don't make a sound. You didn't say don't move." He almost smiled, almost. He helped me swing my legs off the bed, and every part of me screamed. The fracture in my leg wasn't set right yet. Still splinted, still swollen. My ribs felt like they were held together with tape and stubbornness. But underneath the pain was something sharper, something that burned hotter than any injury. Emma's name kept looping in my head, and I thought about every unanswered call to her mother, every missing chart, every strange face lingering too long in the hallway. It all made sense now, in the worst way possible. He found me a jacket from a supply closet too big, smelling like bleach. He wrapped a blanket around my shoulders to hide the hospital gown underneath. "We go out through the east stairwell," he murmured. "Cameras are down there for maintenance. I checked before I came up. You planned this. I hoped I wouldn't have to use it." We moved slow, me leaning on him like a crutch, my bad leg dragging half a step behind every stride. Each footstep down that stairwell felt like it was borrowed time. Somewhere above us, a nurse call bell rang out, distant and sharp, and I froze. Certain someone had noticed my bed sitting empty. The cop didn't stop moving. "Keep going," he breathed. "If someone official finds us, we're done. You go back to that room, and I lose whatever window I have left to get to her first." Outside, the night air hit me like ice water, but it woke something up in my chest that had been asleep for months. Guilt, maybe. Or purpose. His car was an unmarked sedan, parked crooked near the emergency exit like he'd left in a hurry the first time too. He eased me into the passenger seat, and as he pulled out of the lot, he finally started filling in the blanks I didn't know I needed. "Emma called dispatch 2 nights ago," he said, gripping the wheel tight. "Not 911, the non-emergency line. Ask if a restraining order takes effect immediately or after paperwork clears." His jaw tightened. "She didn't give a name. But the number traced back to your ex-wife's address." My stomach dropped. "She's been dealing with this alone. Looks that way. And the boyfriend, Derek Voss, he's not just some guy with a temper. There's an assault charge from 2 years back in another county, dropped when the girlfriend recanted. There's also a warrant now for violating parole. He's not someone who reacts well to being confronted." I stared out at the streetlights blinking past, my reflection ghost-like in the window, pale and stitched together. "Why didn't anyone call me?" "Because your ex-wife didn't want you involved. Pride, fear, I don't know which. But your name came up in a call log from the hospital 2 nights ago, too. Someone used an internal line to phone a burner number registered to Voss's cousin." He glanced at me. "Someone here has been feeding him information, which means he probably knows you're awake. He probably knows we're coming." The road blurred ahead of us, and for the first time since the crash, I wasn't thinking about the pain in my body. I was thinking about how fast we could get there before Emma became a headline instead of my daughter. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac I used to know by heart, and even in the dark I recognized the crooked mailbox, the porch light Emma always begged her mother to fix. Officer Reyes cut the engine 2 houses down and killed the headlights, and for a second the silence was worse than any siren. "Stay behind me," he said. "No heroics. You're not exactly built for it right now." He wasn't wrong. Every step toward that house felt like dragging a body that didn't belong to me anymore. Ribs screaming, the IV bruise on my arm throbbing under the bandage I'd wrapped myself in a bathroom on the way out. But my legs kept moving because somewhere behind that door was my daughter, and nothing in me knew how to stop walking toward that. We heard the yelling before we reached the porch. A man's voice, low and mean, the kind that doesn't need volume to be terrifying. Then Emma's voice, sharp with fear, saying words no 14-year-old should have to say to calm down an adult twice her size. Reyes held up a hand, motioning me to wait, but my body had already stopped listening to caution. I pushed past him, and the door gave way easier than I expected, like even the house was tired of holding this secret. Voss stood in the middle of the living room, Emma's wrist locked in his grip, her face white with a fear I hadn't seen since she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. He turned when the door banged open, and for a moment nobody moved. "Well, look who crawled out of his hospital bed," he said, and there was no fear in his voice, only contempt. "Let her go." My voice came out rougher than I meant it to, more growl than words, but it was steady, steadier than I felt. "She's not yours to take orders about anymore," he said. And I remembered every custody paper I'd signed in defeat. Every night I told myself distance was safer for her. I was done believing that lie. Reyes stepped in beside me, badge raised even though he wasn't supposed to be here. Voice calm in a way that only made the room feel more dangerous. "Let the girl go, Marcus. It's over." Voss's grip tightened on Emma's wrist, and she gasped. And something in me that had been broken since the crash simply refused to stay broken any longer. I stepped forward, ignoring the way my body screamed in protest, and put myself between him and the door. "You want to hurt someone," I said. "Hurt me. I'm right here." For one terrible second I thought he would. His eyes flicked between us, calculating, cornered, and then Reyes moved fast, closing the distance and twisting Voss's arm behind his back before he could react. Emma stumbled free, breathing hard, and the room exploded into motion, cuffs clicking, Voss shouting threats that meant nothing anymore, backup sirens finally screaming up the street like they'd been waiting for permission to matter. Emma stood frozen for a heartbeat, staring at me like she didn't trust her own eyes. Like the father she remembered wasn't supposed to be standing in a doorway held together by bandages and stubbornness. Then she ran. She crossed that living room floor faster than I could brace for, and I caught her, ribs be damned, arms wrapping around her shaking shoulders, as she buried her face in my chest and finally let herself cry. "Dad," she whispered over and over, like she needed to say it enough times to believe it. "Dad, you came. You actually came." I held on to her like the whole world might try to take her back if I let go for even a second. Behind us, 2 more officers had come through the front door, radios crackling, one of them already crouched beside the boyfriend, cuffing him against the kitchen tile while he spat something about lawyers and lawsuits. Nobody was listening to him. My focus was on the top of Emma's head, on the way her whole body kept shuddering like she was trying to cry out 3 months of silence in 90 seconds. Then the paramedics arrived, and everything sped up in a way I wasn't ready for. Someone put a blanket around Emma's shoulders, even though it wasn't cold. Someone else asked me to sit down, said my heart rate was climbing too fast for someone who just ripped his own IV out of his arm an hour earlier. I didn't sit. I couldn't. Not with Emma's hand fisted in my hospital gown, like she thought I might vanish if she loosened her grip. That's when I noticed the cop who'd started all this. The one who'd whispered those 4 words in my hospital room, standing quietly near the doorway with his arms crossed, watching the scene unfold like he'd seen it before. His name was Ferris. I hadn't asked until then. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. The kind that says, "It's over now," even though something in his expression told me it wasn't, not completely. "There's something you need to see," he said, once the paramedic stepped back to let Emma breathe. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket, edges soft from being handled too many times. A restraining order. Filed 3 weeks ago, Emma's name on it, not her mother's. My stomach dropped somewhere past the floor. "She filed it herself?" I asked, my voice cracking in a way that had nothing to do with my injuries. "She tried," Ferris said. "Court needs a guardian's signature for a minor. Her mother wouldn't sign it. Boyfriend made sure of that." I looked at Emma, who wouldn't meet my eyes now, staring instead at the carpet like it held answers she didn't want to say out loud. 15 years old, trying to protect herself through the legal system because the adults around her had failed so completely she had nowhere else to turn. "She came to the station twice," Ferris added quietly, like it hurt him to say it. "First time, nobody believed a kid crying about her mom's boyfriend. Second time, I was on shift. That's when it clicked, the missing chart. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. The man loitering by my door days before any of this happened. None of it had been random. Ferris had been building a case in secret, piecing together a timeline nobody official wanted to touch yet, terrified that if the wrong person inside that hospital caught wind of it, Emma would pay the price before anyone could intervene. "There's someone else involved," Ferris said, lowering his voice even further, glancing toward the paramedics loading the boyfriend into the back of a squad car. "Someone who's been passing information. I don't think we're finished yet." Emma's grip on my gown tightened. "Dad," she whispered, finally lifting her eyes to mine, fear replacing the relief that had been there seconds ago. "There's something I never told you. Something about Mom." 6 weeks passed before I could climb my own porch steps without gripping the railing like a lifeline. Physical therapy took the mornings, and most afternoons I spent on a bench outside Emma's school, waiting the way I used to when she was 7, and terrified of the crossing guard. She'd walk out, spot me, and for the first 2 weeks she wouldn't run. She'd just nod, get in the car, and stare out the window while I drove us to get pancakes at the diner on 5th. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It was something quieter. Permission to try again. The truth about her mother came out slowly, in pieces. Emma could only hand me a little at a time, like she was testing whether I'd drop them. Turned out her mother hadn't known everything, but she'd known enough, and looked away because looking away was easier than losing the house, the car payments, the version of stability she'd convinced herself she still had. That's a different kind of broken than mine. I'm not sure it's one I can forgive yet, but Emma doesn't need me to hate her mother. She needs me to stay standing, so I stayed. Officer Ferris, Mike, he told me to call him, finally, over coffee in my kitchen one Sunday, turned out to be no stranger at all. He'd grown up 2 streets over from me, back when we were kids racing bikes down Miller Avenue. We'd lost touch after high school the way people do, but he'd kept tabs quietly for years, through mutual friends, through the small-town grapevine that never really goes silent. When my marriage started cracking, when the custody hearings got ugly, he'd heard enough to worry. When Emma's name started showing up in reports he wasn't even supposed to see, he made it his business to watch. "I wasn't going to let you find out the hard way," he told me, turning his mug in his hands. "Not after everything your family's been through." I asked him why he never just called me directly, years ago, and he only shrugged and said some things you don't explain, you just show up for. Emma started therapy on Tuesdays. I started going too, in a different room down the same hallway, learning how to say things out loud I'd buried since the divorce. Some nights she still flinches at raised voices on the television, and I've learned to keep the remote close and my temper closer. We're not fixed. I don't think people fix like sentences do, clean and closed. But most evenings now, she leaves her door open a crack when she's doing homework. And sometimes she asks me questions about nothing. What my favorite song was in high school, whether I ever broke a bone before this one. Small things. The kind of things that mean a door isn't locked anymore. I used to think being broken meant being finished. Turns out it just means being incomplete, waiting on the next chapter to write itself, one shaky, ordinary day at a time. If you've lived something like this, a call,